So Pioneer has been back for a while now. It's been a few months since the announcement. People have had some time to play around with the format, find out what's good, find out what's not. And I bought a few decks. Blue-White Control, Lotus Field, they were so good in the beginning, and the format seems to have changed. So I brought an expert in from Poland, Piotr Glogowski, Mythic Champion, banner of certain cards in Pioneer and before the pandemic, to check in on what the format is up to right now. Welcome to the Cardmarket YouTube channel.
Hey, very nice for you to have me here.
It's an absolute pleasure. Listen, what we're going to do is I asked you for a list of 5 decks that you believe are the top 5 decks in Pioneer in order. You didn't give them to me with the biggest confidence.
I have some strong opinions, but most of my opinions are kinda in the middle space.
We came here for your strong opinions, so hopefully the middle space ones are good as well. Listen, before we delve into it though, just so you guys know, we really rely on especially subs to grow the channel. So if you are not subbed yet, please click that sub button. Who knows, maybe if you sub, we'll convince Wizards to print a 2-mana Teferi. You don't know if we don't have the power unless you click it. But in the meantime, let's delve into it. Piotr, I bought Blue-White Control and I bought Lotus Field, and they are not on your list anymore. What happened?
Well, so the first deck, Blue-White Control, used to be all the rage for a certain period of time. I think after Neon Dynasty dropped, the Wandering Emperor giving some power to the deck, it used to be played a lot. But even back then, I was kinda baffled by the fact that it was played so much, and fairly quickly, when the Pioneer format revived a little bit with the Pro Tour announcements, etc., and making Pioneer a relevant format basically for people to play again, I think some people started putting a little bit more effort into figuring out what's strong, and Blue-White Control being kind of cumbersome, kind of clunky, playing some of the more expensive cards in the format, not really having a great counterspell suite, and also not really using some of the more broken cards of the format well, like Treasure Cruise or Nykthos.
Yeah, the amount of permanence that Blue-White Control can put on the board doesn't really go with Nykthos.
Exactly. And well, the fact that you would think that the control deck's role would be to be able to defeat strategies that try to win by casting some powerful spells. But the other deck that did that, the Lotus Field deck, which basically puts expensive, powerful spells on the stack, is a nightmare matchup for Blue-White Control, because with just a few absorbs, you can never stop the amount of powerful stuff they can put on the stack. And you also just kind of die to cyborg tech like Thought Distortion or Niv Mizzet or like whatever the Lotus Field player would think of that destroyed you.
So you think Lotus Field is off because their main prey is no longer around, is no longer a viable deck?
Partially. I think Lotus Field's emergence was, well, it was always present, but there was, I think, sort of re-emergence of Lotus Field when Blue-White Control got big, because it is so good at preying at this slow control deck. But as it comes, Lotus Field is also not the fastest deck. Its strength comes, in my view, mostly from its capability of dealing with hate and being able to be basically unstoppable given enough time. Dumping Spheres, counter spells, you can play around all of that. Like you have card advantage, you have ways to tutor the previously mentioned Thought Distortion. Now with Kamigawa, where the Channel Lens, Boseju, Otawara answers any kind of hate. Where the Lotus Field deck struggles is in the fact that if you do not happen to line up your hand perfectly and you do not happen to draw an Arboreal Grazer in it, you're looking for a basically turn 4 maybe, but realistically 5 win very often, and that just doesn't cut it. People's decks are too fast and too good.
Yeah, and Sylvan Scrying for the Boseju when you need it for the extra turn is just not fast enough when they have a Damping Sphere on the board.
Exactly. The Sylvan Scrying for Boseju is excellent if your opponent puts a Damping Sphere and just waits. Most of the decks do something besides the waiting, so that's a bit of a problem.
So in that case, we'll get to the actual members of your Pantheon at the moment, at least at the current moment, those that you deemed to be worthy of the list. On 5th place, you put Rakdos Midrange, which surprised me because it feels like a deck that a lot of people picked up because they could already kind of understand the Anvil kind of combo and the sacrifice stuff. But you actually put it as a contender, as not just something people pick up because it's mid-range and it's fun. What makes this deck so strong?
Well, we have basically 2 versions of Rakdos. One of them is the Anvil sacrifice sub-theme deck that you mentioned, which I do not hold in the highest regard.
So that's not the one on this list.
That's not the one on the list. That is a deck that I think was mostly fine before Lurus got banned, but without Lurus, then there is little reason to go that route. The deck that I'm a bigger fan of is the full-on Rakdos midrange with Card Advantage, Fable of the Mirror Breaker, Graveyard Trespasser, etc. There are some of the good cards that line up well with the format. I don't hold Rakdos midrange in the highest of regards, but I do think it's a solid deck. I do think that for someone who enjoys the playstyle, it could be a great choice, and I do think some of the incidental graveyard hate cards like Graveyard Trespasser and Go Blank out of the sideboard can line up quite well sometimes against the decks that rely a little bit more on Treasure Cruise, or even against mono green with Storm the Festival being a threat out of the graveyard. Having access to kind of incidental ways to counter that puts the midrange deck in a pretty decent spot in some of the matchups.
So even that more so than just a Thoughtseize Fatal Push package, or that was good, it goes without saying kind of thing?
Well, it goes without saying.
Yeah,
That's the base of the deck, but then like on top of those cards, it's important what are you going to supplement your Thoughtseize Fatal Push with, I think.
All right.
Because
you did say that it's good if you like midrange, but it's maybe not up there. What are its bad matchups then? What are you not hoping to face if you're playing this deck?
As a typical midrange deck, you can have some like good matchups, probably not many too great matchups, because after all your cards can just line up poorly. On the basic level, if your opponent actually gets to do their thing against you with Storm the Festival, even the Lotus Field deck, or the Delve spells, if they just cast a Treasure Cruise, that kind of undoes all of your advancements with your Thoughtseizes and puts you in a bad spot. So all around, I think it's a deck with mostly balanced matchups around the like 50% range.
You did say that it's not that oppressive, but say you're playing always against the same flatmate you live with and they always beat you with this deck. What's your best plan of attack?
I think I would just be playing one of the solid decks and like...
Okay, luckily the answer to that question then is coming up now. As number 4, you put Mono Green Devotion, which is relatively a new one. Why is this deck so strong?
Mono Green Devotion has a very strong internal plan. The extent to which it goes is pretty high. It goes pretty big, right? So of course it's based around Nyctas, and then untapping the Nyctas with Nissas, Kioras, etc. lets you go for some really big turns. And there's somewhat recent discovery of the Infinite combo in the deck with Karn, the Great Creator, Kioras, etc.
So that's not just a meme.
It is not just a meme. It is a thing that can feasibly happen. It's a deck that goes really big and can crush decks that are not well equipped to handle it. If your opponent does their thing and you do your thing, you probably, as Mono Green Devotion, are going to do it faster and stronger. For example, when you play against the Lotus Field deck, you're probably going to be able to find your Karn and set up a Dumping Sphere and put your opponent in a hard position earlier than they can combo off on you.
And then you've got trolls and stuff to be turn the corner, right?
Exactly. When you're playing against some more lower tier decks, like maybe some like aggro decks or like weaker mid-range decks, then if they don't have great tools to stop you, you're just going to ignore what they do, play a troll or two, play a cavalier, and then just go off of your Nyctas, put half of your deck onto the battlefield with Storm the Festival in one turn and presumably win. Mono Green Devotion is both a mono green deck and a Karn the Great Creator deck, which means that it just doesn't have a great sideboard. So it's not very flexible, and there are a few problematic things that are tough to beat with it. Namely, the Winota deck can go a little bit faster than you, especially when they're on the play, and then it's kind of hard to come back.
And you don't have much removal, right?
Yes, you don't have much removal because green is not known for removing creatures very efficiently. Yeah. So it's a tough problem to solve, to try to beat Winota effectively. When you're playing against Thing in the Ice, that is a card that is great against you, and you kind of just have to let it sit there and do its thing. It has 7 power, it pressures you quickly, and when it bounces all of your creatures, it undoes a lot of your work. So
your devotion is gone.
Yes, it's a tough one to crack too. With the emergence of the new prowess decks, those also seem like a little bit of a tough matchup, because if someone can just play 1-drops, use removal spells endlessly on your creatures so that you have trouble setting up, and then can kill you or refresh with Treasure Cruise.
Yeah.
Or Expressive Iteration, it's a little bit of a tough matchup to approach. So I think Mono Green is so internally strong that it's really good at beating random decks and kind of bad decks, but it struggles against a few of the better decks in the metagame, making it a strong but not necessarily my favoritely positioned deck in the format.
Okay, well now I believe we're going to get to the hot takes. So far it's been pretty moderate, but I almost dropped the pad when I saw Winota number 3. It's supposed to be the S tier deck in the format. Why is it only at the number 3 slot?
The Winota deck is a little bit weird to me. I have played quite a bit with it, and it is definitely strong. You know, many people are also pretty unhappy when playing against it, and you know, somebody will mention that maybe it should be banned or not, etc. In general, the Winota deck is more, let's say, toxic to play against than it is strong. Somewhat inconsistent. You rely a lot on drawing your Winota to actually have your powerful turns and doing stuff. You have only 4 Winotas in your deck, you have a little card selection with Fable of the Mirror Breaker, but not too much. There is a huge delta in the power level of this deck between the draws where you draw Winota and where you don't. People are preparing to beat it, and especially now, like, people just try to play removal that can kill Winota. If you can kill Winota, again, the power level of this deck drops quite significantly. Is it prowess deck, for example, is built in a way where it is able to play 4 Reckless Rages, a 1 red mana, 4 damage instant spell, perfect for taking off Winota at a very low opportunity cost. You just have to hold up a red mana. With all of those things being said, I think Winota shapes the format and makes it so that decks really need to respect Winota, and they have to be able to remove Winota or interact with creatures a lot to prevent Winota from being game crashing on turn 3-4. I think it's more scary than it is powerful.
I have another seemingly hot take that I noticed on the board. Usually number 2 slot, which we're going to move on to now because we don't need to explain why Winota's strong. People are tired of hearing about Winota. Number 2 we'd usually see maybe Mono Red, but Mono Red is not in your top 5, spoiler alert, at all. What happened?
I think Mono Red kind of evolved, and we're going to talk about it in the next spot.
Okay, so the next spot here is EZ Phoenix, which is a deck people expect. If you could just briefly explain why it's strong, and so strong that it's number 2, and then discuss this Mono Red thing you teased.
Yeah, so EZ Phoenix is just a mainstay of the format for a long time. It has been a trend in basically all the constructed formats for the past year or so, maybe, that the expressive iteration decks are pretty good. Even though recently many players turned more so towards the more control-ish, Narset, Days Undoing, Collective Defiance versions of Blue-Red, I think I respect Phoenix much more, and I think the baseline thing that Phoenix does is stronger. Once again, in Phoenix we see the nice 1 mana instant removal spell that can deal with Winota, Lightning Axe. And it's part of their game plan already. Yes, it's pretty easy to include in your deck because you want to discard the Oracle of Phoenix, and then you get to deal with Winota at a low opportunity cost. It's a great thing in the ice deck, which despite its maybe ebbs and flows of the metagame not always being the best thing to do, it will always remain a great card against a large portion of the metagame. I mentioned that Mono Green struggles really hard to beat it. Winota is another deck that really doesn't like to see Thing in the Ice on the other side of the board. So it's a card I really like having access to. And I just think that the Arclight Phoenix Temporal Trespass, Galvanic Iteration plan is inherently a bit stronger than the Narset shenanigans that people might turn themselves towards, and I'm typically a bigger fan of the more proactive deck. Yeah, so it's really strong, but it's not number 1 on your list, so there must be a way to beat EZ Phoenix if you're tired of losing to it. What is EZ Phoenix bad against? Is this just as straightforward as putting Rest in Peace in your sideboard? EZ Phoenix is a very well-rounded deck. I actually think it used to do somewhat poorly against Lotus Field decks, but generally it is pretty hard to attack effectively in many ways. But the first one on my list is Blue-Red Prowess. Yeah, it shows a lot of colors and cards. Yes, it does show a lot of colors and cards, and the reason why I like the Blue-Red Prowess deck right now, it's kind of a new thing, maybe the flavor of the month, but I think it shows a lot of promise, and it structurally seems like a very well built and very promising deck. Drops the maybe Phoenix packages, etc., which while being strong and proactive. In Pioneer, you don't have great ways to discard your Arclight Phoenix. It actually does take a little bit of effort, like you don't have Faithless Looting or this.
You don't even have that in Modern.
Yeah. But like you kind of end up spending mana on charter cores and pieces of the puzzle a lot, and sometimes not get there. So that's kind of the part of the Is It Phoenix deck I don't like. Sometimes you just end up cantripping into cantrips, into which grow you more cantrips, and kind of not a lot of substance happens. The Prowess deck is built thanks to the new card from Streets of New Capenna, Ledger Shredder.
Yeah, the Bird Lawyer.
Yes, exactly. And it is also able to use one-drops, Prowess one-drops, Monastery Swift Spear, Soulscar Mage. They mean that you can start playing the game from turn 1, you play your creature, then you play maybe second creature on turn 2, and then you can keep cantripping, casting removal spells, and eventually refueling with Treasure Cruise, meaning that you get to trigger Prowess a lot, you almost never run out of gas, and you can play both the very aggressive game, forcing your opponent to answer one-drops, but you're also absolutely fine playing a game where you go down to 10 cards in your library. This is kind of what the mono-red deck would like to be, which is why mono-red is not on the list. Effectively, blue-red Prowess trades a little bit of the aggression of the mono-red versions, let's say, for great amounts of resiliency.
Yeah, it kind of feels like the child of the Phoenix deck and the Mono Red deck, at least from the way you're explaining it now. It's your number one, so there might not be an answer to this yet, maybe just time will tell, but is there a way to beat this? If a lot of people are listening to you and all the next tournaments just have this deck, how do you come prepared against it?
This is something I was trying to figure out so far myself. I'm not sure about it yet, because as I said, structurally, it's just a very powerful deck. That's it. Cheap threats and good aggression and lots of card advantage, and can just sideboard into perfect answers and maybe even a few planeswalkers to beat removal if it would want to. I think if I had to play in a Pioneer tournament soon, I would choose the Blue-Red Prowess deck. So I don't have the answer as to what like really beats it yet. It's very possible that something does, and like it's not the best deck that ever existed, but it's just fundamentally built on such a strong foundation that I'm really impressed by it so far.
Actually, that's annoying because that kind of answers my last question, because I was going to ask you to put your money where your mouth is, and if you were going to go to a tournament tomorrow, or if you win, you win, but if you lose, you die, you put your life on the line. I was going to ask you what you would play. So do you still stick to what you just said? Would you come playing
with those gruesome stakes? Definitely.
Definitely. All right. Confidence in the deck. You heard it here first. Is it prowess if your life is at stake? Thank you, Piotr. I hope all of you guys could take a lot of information from this. If you're checking into Pioneer recently, if you're going to play a lot of events this summer, if you're going to Malmo. In the meantime, you will see a lot of videos with Piotr Kanister peppered through the month. We're going to play a lot of gameplay. In the meantime, thank you for coming. Listen, if you did like his takes and want to hear a lot more about maybe Modern or see him play Pioneer, you can follow him on his Twitch with some interesting music in the background. Where can we find you?
You can find me at twitch.com/Kanister_MTG, or you can find me on youtube.com/Kanister.
Thank you. Well, that was a Pioneer metagame. Don't forget to sub. We'll see you guys in the next video.